After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6 and d4, white is playing the Scotch game, and this is going to be the final chapter. We're just going to go through a couple of mentions that we haven't seen at all during the saga, and that's going to be it. So we take the pawn as we know, and now knight takes back. So in the variation with bishop to c5 and knight to b3, as we know, we have to play bishop to b6. There's absolutely no reason to, I don't know, defend that bishop with b pawn or d pawn, because you just lose the bishop pair in an open game for no reason. And if you don't like the bishop pair enough to preserve it, you are not worthy of watching this video. So after, in the variation with knight to c3, knight to f6, the novelty is the early queen to e2 move. In the past we went through, instead of queen e2, we went through bishop to g5 move, and the idea eventually to play the queen somewhere, anywhere, where basically pin the knight, and the idea of also playing knight to d2. This looks like the best variation for white, although it's faulty, because after castling and knight coming to d2, to d5, you have the sacrifice in f2, so the whole plan here doesn't work. So in this video, the novelty is this move, also because I've encountered this myself in a FIDE tournament lately, and I wanted to make a video about. Now here you just go on with castling, same thing, and bishop to g5 kind of gives birth to something similar. And now you can say, okay, bishop to g5 might hit different now, because bishop to f2 is no longer a strong threat, and white might, pin this knight, put pressure on the knight with knight to d5, and we don't have a black bishop, a dark square bishop that can go in e7 and protect the integrity of the pawn structure here. So this looks like a nice plan. Also, there's a queen e2 also is allowing the idea of e5 pinning, exploiting the pin of the knight. Looks really good. However, you just play knight to d4, and this already stops every single threat that can possibly exist. For example, this is not possible. e5 is not possible now because you got an attack on the queen. The knight's also, the knight's attack the queen will have to move. If the queen moves, you got an attack on c2 with a fork attacking king and rook. Let's say if the queen goes back, then you attack the bishop. White is getting passive. White just wasted tempos. You attack the bishop, and you're out of every single trouble. If the bishop keeps the pin, rook to e8. And now we're threatening to simply attack the bishop again. It's a bit crazy, but still, then you can go for free in e4, win a pawn, threaten discover checks, you're completely winning. If the white player simply defends that pawn with bishop d3, looks like a very reasonable move. Black plays knight takes in e4. Boom! It's an incredible move. Completely careless of the queen. So if we get taken back, you can just take this bishop, you've won a pawn. If instead our opponent does take our queen, you now play knight to c3 check. After the king moves, simply recapture the queen, they take you back, and now you recapture the bishop, you're up a piece. And in this position, after knight c3 check, what if king goes to d2? Well, same thing, you just take the queen. And let's look at this idea, knight taking in d4. So after recapturing the bishop and white recapturing our knight, this knight remains attacked. So there's no way to get out of this trouble. So let's make a recap so that we familiarize with the patterns. And so d4 take, bishop c5, we're looking at the variation with knight b3, bishop b6, knight to c3, knight f6, and now the early queen e2, castle. Remember, by the way, I forgot to mention queen e2, the idea is to be able to play bishop e3. Let's finish though analyzing what's wrong with bishop g5 now, because this is actually such a scary idea. And here everyone's tendency will be to play maybe d6 to stop the arrival of e5, but then knight to d5 is a winning move actually, because you can't play bishop f2. You don't have that option in this variation because the queen is in e2. Now here we just play knight d4. What happens when our opponent takes us? Okay, bishop takes back, and now this bishop is controlling e5, and this is crucial. e5 cannot be pushed, obviously, because you can take it for free. The queen can't take the bishop because rook e8 pins the queen to the king. So what if our opponent plays knight to d5 now? Nothing. You just take this pawn, and you're just defending f6, you're attacking the rook. c3 cannot be played now to kind of lock our bishop in, because we're attacking this rook, and then we're winning. There's nothing here for our opponent. So instead of c3, what if rook to d1, getting the rook active. But because you see here in this position, rook to b1 is also a move, you might argue, okay, we can get the bishop away, and then this rook isn't really attacking this pawn. So there's no that usual attack of the rook attacking a piece and going for the 7 rank, because this square is still protected. The problem is here you have to play c6. This is the best move, and we're waiting for knight to go here to f6 so we can take back with the bishop. The problem is that if you just move the bishop away, then f4 comes, and this is annoying to deal with, because then you move the bishop again, maybe c3 comes, and you gotta abandon this diagonal, and white is gonna smash the king side, and that's obviously not good. So here in this position, when white plays rook to b1, leave the bishop there and attack this knight. The knight will have to go, and then we'll be able to save our bishop, especially if the knight moves. So in this position, queen a5 check wins. Queen is attacking the king and the bishop at the same time, so that's a fork. You might argue that the rook can take the bishop in exchange. First of all, let's see how queen d2 loses, obviously because of bishop c3. You're paying the queen to the king. Let's go back. What if the king moves? Okay, now taking e4. So you're not really taking this yet, because then the white player will take your bishop in b2. But now the knight here is threatening knight c3. Position evaluated -6. At this point, there's no coming back for our opponent. I mean, that's not even possible for our opponent to swap everything. Queen d3, you just taking f2, wins the game. Queen e1, desperate for swaps, but still knight c3, and then the opponent will have to go on a dark square, and then when you take the rook, it comes with check. So not worth seeing anymore. So after rook takes, then you can take the knight. You're equally material. This pawn cannot take this pawn because rook e8 pins the queen to the king. I mean, you can say bishop e3 is possible. Or you can say maybe e5 is possible. Okay, let's look at both of them. e5 now pinning the knight. I mean, exploiting the pin of the knight. You can play d6. The idea is to simply win this pawn. Our opponent cannot really take us here with the pawn because rook e8 will pin the queen to the king. We've seen it before. See, here you might argue the bishop can take the knight and break the pawn structure. Yeah, it's fine. G takes. And that's it. You actually, okay, the queen doesn't have any checks or anything. You got the bishop here. This is a better endgame for black. We've got an insane center. We're going to take this pawn no matter what and fix the pawn structure. And the pawn cannot take any of these two pawns because rook e8 really wins the game immediately. Here in this position, what if white takes with the pawn? Then rook e8. And now the only thing left to do for white is to play bishop to e3. Okay, d4. And we're recapturing the lost piece. Okay, queen to d2, I'm pinning. And now queen recaptures this pawn. The bishop is still pinned, so bishop to e2, I'm pinning the bishop. Now obviously we need to recapture this one, and that comes with an attack on the rook, and this cannot be defended because so queen to b4 seems to be defended both pieces, but you have the infiltration in f2 and black is completely winning. So in this position, earlier we went through e5 and everything that happens next. What if white takes the pawn? You might argue, okay, rook e8 here, and you might argue, okay, bishop can go here to e3, but now we don't have the same threat as before, but now we do because knight to d5 is a very strong move. And look, position is evaluated as if black was almost up a piece, even though we're not up a piece yet, but you can say, okay, the pawn in f is defending the bishop and we're not going to win a piece at the end of this. Let's make an example. Queen to d2, I'm pinning the bishop, preparing bishop e2 and castle. If we take our opponent, we'll just take with the pawn, maybe have a bad pawn structure, but at least survive and carry on in the endgame. We also have an isolated pawn in the d file if you think about it. So knight takes, pawn takes, and now the best move is b6. The idea of fianchetto in this bishop. Bishop to d3, developing. Looks like an equal endgame. Although, don't forget, we're up a pawn, and you can see why we have this advantage. Queen to f6 comes now with an attack on the rook. c3 allows the queen to defend the rook. Bishop to b7. And now the funny thing is our opponent can't castle because our queen is excellently placed in f6. And rook f1 here is not possible because you do have checks that allow you to infiltrate in the opponent territory, completely winning endgame. If queen f2, desperate for swap at this point, well, queen to c3 check makes life very easy for us. Let's do one more recap so we can familiarize. Okay, take, bishop c5, knight b3. Okay, bishop b6, knight c3, knight f6, and now the early queen e2. Castle. And we're still looking at bishop g5. Knight to d4. Okay, knight takes, bishop takes, and now knight to d5, putting pressure on this knight. We take this pawn. What about rook to d1 instead of rook b1? The white player gets active, says, you know, I've given you a pawn, but at least I've got development. Okay, h6, attack the bishop. And now bishop takes just means we're going to take back. Knight takes, queen takes back. We're up a pawn, and our opponent's structure is safe. And our opponent's post structure is even damaged, so we are just winning the endgame quite easily. So let's look at our opponent keeping the pin. Okay, g5. And now this is what you do, basically. You get rid of the problem like that. It looks a bit bad for our king, but that's okay. Bishop g3, and now we take this knight. Now is he taking with the pawn? Is wrong because rook e8 is a threat. So rook takes d5. Let's look at this. Rook e8 anyway. Make an example. Queen to d3 now. To unpin the queen, you play c6. And the rook is trapped. I mean, the rook will be able to go to f5. But then d5. And the bishop releases an attack on the rook. And the pawn on and the rook are attacking e4. It's a joke. So in this position, instead of queen d3, what if white plays queen to h5, attacking the pawn in h6, infiltrating. This looks much more dangerous. c6. Okay, rook to f5. d5. Boom! Completely crazy. We are releasing an attack on the bishop, but we on the rook, but we're completely ignoring the fact that this rook can go to f7, and then queen to g6 looks like it's going to be checkmate very soon. But the thing is, our opponent, the white player, can't take this pawn in any possible way. If white takes with the rook, creating a mate net here, checkmate to come, black finishes the game with bishop to c3 check, and now king going to e2 is really stupid because rook e4 check, and it's we're completely winning. You can take it from there. King to d1. How does that save our opponent? Well, he's played bishop to g4, forking queen and king, so our opponent is forced to take. But now you can play rook to e4. This is a beautiful move because it threatens two things at the same time. It threatens the queen and the checkmate. So the queen can't just escape and save the rook and make any sort of threats, because then we will checkmate here. So we are winning loads of material. And in this position, rook takes is not possible. What if queen takes in f7? This looks maybe more natural, but still. King h8 and white has nothing. Here there's still an attack on this rook. Rook can't go to f6 because of the bishop. So after rook f3, you take this pawn. And now there's an attack on the rook again. Rook to e3, queen a5 check. The king has to move. Bishop to e6. Attacks the queen and allows the fluid development of the rook. So the rook will go and make a check, and it's going to be checkmate at some point. Queen to g6, threatening maybe a perpetual check. Although there is nothing. But I mean, let's just say threaten to be annoying. Bishop to g4 check. This cannot be blocked in any way. I mean, it can. Best thing to do will be f3, because if you think about it, bishop to e2, this loses to rook a to d8 check. The king has literally got nowhere to go. He has to block with the rook. And now bishop takes with check. Only move is to take back, and then you can take this with check, and you can take it from here. We really don't need to go on now. So in this position, after the bishop check, what if f3? Our opponent tries to find some counterplay at least. Okay, rook to e6, attacks the queen. And now the queen will have to move. Queen to f7. There's nowhere else to really go. Okay, now we take this pawn here. Completely crazy, because we know that our opponent doesn't have a single check. And there's an attack on this rook. And there's an attack on this rook. So we're threatening to take that rook for free. This cannot be taken. Like, in any way you want to take, then you still have pawn takes pawn, comes with check, and then you can take the rook, make a queen, also with check, game over very soon. If our opponent takes us, then we're still going to take this rook, and that's the best move. And that's it. White can't just develop the bishop, maybe hope for the last checkmate attempt in h7, because bishop f3 wins the game. And, you also have, let's say, for example, bishop to g2, but you also have the infiltration of the other rook. So we're going to drop the line here. Now we're going to do the last recap, but we're not going to go through bishop g5 idea, because we're going to go through the main idea of the white player there. I'll show you in a second. Bishop c5, knight b3, bishop b6. Okay, knight c3, knight f6. The early queen e2. The whole point is that now we're going to castle, and now bishop e3. So the idea of queen e2 is that bishop e3 is protected with the queen, because if you play bishop e3 too soon, then take, and you've got double isolated pawn. There's absolutely no reason to do that. Okay, the best move now is d5. And you're already making a threat. There's double attack here. And we're happy to be taken by the bishop, so we can play the rook on an open file, because the white player is very likely to castle long side. Obviously, in this case, that's not going to be the case anymore. But the fact is that the development of the light square bishop is penalized in this specific variation, and that means our opponent will be in trouble. So we're going to look at two ideas here. Well, e5 is not possible. You can just take it for free. We're going to look at pawn takes or... Well, knight takes is wrong. There's nothing like that wrong, but it's not the best move for white, because then take. And then after pawn takes back, you can take the bishop. And we just won the bishop pair for no reason. White takes the knight. Okay, the best move is bishop to c1 actually. And now we're threatening rook e8, winning the opponent queen. So here taking the pawn doesn't help, because when you take back, the threat of the two rooks to go to the open file remain. And this can't even be ignored. If white plays queen to d3 and says, you know what, give me a check with the rook, I'll block with the bishop, and I'm completely fine. I'm still attacking this bishop with the rooks. Here, the best move is bishop takes in b2 with an attack on the rook. And that's always going to be the best move. Let's think about it here. Here, after bishop e2, rook to b1 attacks the bishop. What's going to happen now? Queen f6 is the best move, defends the bishop. We never have to worry about this pawn taking us, because that just allows the development of our bishop. Position evaluated minus 3 at this point, so we're completely winning. Let's see, bishop e2 with an idea of castling. Does the white player get to play a normal endgame? Also, because if we take this pawn, we do have a very bad pawn structure. Bishop to f5 comes, and now we're attacking the queen. The queen will have to move. Let's say queen to d2, for instance. Bishop to c3 wins the game. Okay, well then queen to d1 seems like a better move, but now again bishop to c3 is a strong threat, because it ruins the castling chances of our opponent. However, the best move here to continue is actually queen to c6, and it's putting pressure on g2, and it's also threatening the bishop fork here in c2. So after castling to stop the arrival of the queen on this square, let's say castle, bishop to c2 is the best move. Takes a pawn, and the rook can't move to c1, because then he will just win the exchange. And instead of castling, what if our opponent says, you know what, you can go and take the pawn in g2, because if you do that, I'm going to play bishop f3 attacking the queen, and white decides to just take this bishop. Well, okay, then queen to c3 is a fork, and again you're winning the exchange. And here in this position we play bishop to c1, and mention how pawn takes here doesn't work because bishop takes back. Queen to d3 now, how to continue? The best move is bishop takes in b2. And you know, you can say that everything looks equal, but we're actually winning. Let's make an example. If there's a trade, queen takes, rook takes, why is the position -5? Even if the queen hadn't taken, this rook, the position is still -5. How is it possible? The thing is that we have the bishop and our opponent can't castle anymore, and we have an attack on this rook, so we're gonna win the exchange. This is unavoidable, because whether the rook goes to d1 or b1, even if the rook goes to d1, you see, looking for other trades, everything is equal. Why is the position so much winning for black? What's the winning move? Okay, rook f2 check. The bishop blocks, bishop checks. And now knight to d2. Everything is pinned in the territory of our opponent. And now that everything is pinned, we can take advantage and put pressure on the pinned piece. As we all know, bishop to a6 should finish the masterpiece. Right, so back in this position, we mentioned how, you know, the scenarios that occur after knight takes in d5. What if the pawn takes? Okay, take the bishop. And now, obviously, there's two possibilities. White might take this bishop or might take the knight. So it's very similar to before, except there's a knight in c3 now, but it doesn't change anything. Let's make an example. If white takes our knight, bishop to c1, exactly the same thing. And we're threatening rook e8. So queen to d3 moving away, bishop to b2. You see, exactly the same thing. And now the rook has to move. Let's say, for example, okay, let's say if queen takes our queen, right? Okay, take back. And after the knight goes to b5, saving itself from the bishop, maybe threatening knight c7, but it doesn't make any difference. Bishop to a1 just wins for the black player. The reason being that this knight, yes, is putting pressure on this bishop, and this rook, and this knight is threatening to go to c7, attack the rook. But after that, you can make a check first, and then you can save this rook. In this position, instead of the trade of the queens, what if our opponent saves the rook and continues the attack? Okay, well, queen to e7 check, get out of problems. Bishop to e2 is met with queen to b4, winning the game on the spot for black, because you got two attackers over this knight, and that's pinned, and you can't do anything about it. Instead of, what if queen e7 check, and now white blocks with the knight, and reduces the problems, but no, because rook e8. And that we're going to pin that knight forever. f3, an idea of king f2 to unpin the knight. Okay, a5, going for a4. King to f2. Okay, in this case, we're done waiting for our opponent to take us so we can take back. We're just going to take this pawn here because after a5, now we have bishop a6 move available, and that's an extremely strong move. Knight e to d4, for example, to unpin the whole thing. The queen can move somewhere else, maybe to d2 and not worry too much. Okay, bishop to d7, change of plans. Defend this pawn, it's important to defend that pawn. Bishop to e2, a4. And when the knight moves, let's say knight to d2, bishop to d4 wins the game. It's check, the queen can't really take back because it's abandoning the defense of that bishop. That's just one of the many things that will happen, because we do have a great advantage in this position, in this variation, because, as I said, it's a faulty variation. So in this position, what if instead of taking here, the opponent take with the pawn? And by the way, obviously queen takes is not possible because rook e8, so pawn takes in f3. Here we take back the pawn in d5, and after long castle, pinning our knight, we're still winning because knight to c3. Here, if our opponent takes our queen, we're going to take this queen first, bishop takes back, and then rook takes back, and we're up material. So what happens when the pawn simply takes back? Okay, queen to f6, clamping on the weakness here. I'm not really sure what clamp means. All I know is that I found it in a chess book many years ago, and now I still remember that word. Anyway, queen to f6 is the best move. Knight to d4. It seems like it kind of stops the queen from going to c3. He also, puts a knight in a better square. It, trades. Suggests a trade that white will be very happy to do, but we're not going to because we're going to play knight e5. We don't want that trade. And now here, let's make an example to understand what's going on. A move like g3 to get the bishop in fianchetto loses immediately to bishop g4. Okay, the knight can't block because we got 3 attackers over that square. This is winning for black a lot. A move like h4. Same thing, bishop to g4. And the knight f3 here is also not possible because the best move is knight takes. If pawn takes back, bishop takes comes with a fork on queen and rook, completely winning. So that's just not going to happen. Our opponent will have to do, let's say, bishop to pawn to h3. This is the best move recommended by the engine, which is obviously fair enough to stop this very strong threat. Rook to d8. Okay, g4 now. Trying to gain space on the king side, maybe play rook g1, develop the bishop potentially, but there's not much to do. c5. The knight has to move. Knight to f5 looks like a good move. However, bishop to e6 now. Bishop to g2 developed. Bishop to c4 attacking the queen. The queen's got nowhere to go. Wherever she goes, it's a queen f2. Anything you want to think, queen a6 is an inevitable move. And now we're winning this game. The last variation, and then we're going to close this video. d4, take, knight, bishop to c5, knight b3, you move the bishop away, knight c3, knight f6, queen e2, castle. And now bishop to e3, we know we play d5. Okay, what if white just trades all of that and said, you know what, let's do this, let's just trade and simplify the game. Hopefully I don't get crashed. Okay, a takes back, now we got this rook coming down, castle long. This rook can't go there yet because of the knight. And you can't really play d4 because you're not threatening the knight because the rook will be taking your queen. It's pinned, so it looks like a nice game. Rook to e8. And now we're gonna look at the move f3 to put more protection over this pawn chain. Because you see knight d5 is wrong. It looks like a nice move, but okay, let's start with knight d5 actually. Let's say white takes this pawn now with the knight. What's the best move to continue? Okay, take the pawn in e4. Our opponent doesn't have any strong check or anything. Like, for example, knight to b6 looks interesting because he attacks the rook and it discovers an attack on our queen with the rook. So it looks like when we move the queen that we're going to lose the rook. However, this loses because queen g5 check. And now whichever way you want to block or whatever you want to do, let's say king b1, you're just going to recapture the knight. And that's it. You're just up a piece. And f3 doesn't work here because knight c3 check and you also win the queen. You don't have to worry about back rank mate because you got knight and the queen as well. So in this position, knight to b6 idea doesn't work. What if knight to c3? Same thing, we've seen something similar before. Knight takes in c3. If they take our queen, you can take this one, take, and then you're up material. It's a Zwischenzug. If they take back, queen to g5 check is the best move now. And now if the king moves, then you're winning the queen. So what if queen blocks is kind of the only thing left to do. Queen to e7. Threatening to go to a3 and then checkmate very soon. I mean, it's not really a checkmate, but it's a deadly threat. Queen to f4 is the only move that the engine considers to be saving the game for white, because after the infiltration of the queen, it will allow the king to get going somewhere and try to survive. Bishop e6 is the best move. And now a move like rook to d3, to make an example, so that the king will have several escapes, is met with bishop takes. Pawn takes is a suicide, because then the rook is going check, and king going to b2, and then you got check again, it's mate. King going to d2, you got mate from e1, so it's checkmate. So pawn, the c pawn taking, still rook takes in a2, completely winning endgame for the black player. So in this position, what if instead of rook d3, what if bishop to d3? Okay, still the best move is rook a2. There's just no compensation. There's nothing that our opponent is even threatening. You can say queen e4 with a stupid threat of going to h7. A true beginner move. Is met with queen check. King can't move to b1 because of the mate. King to d2. f5. Attacks the queen. Position evaluated. Position has been evaluated -5 something for a long time now. Queen will have to move queen f4 with an attack on c7. Either way, there's an attack on this knight and the rook is pinning this pawn, so you can take that knight for free. The best move is queen takes b3. And the funny thing is that it was completely unstoppable. And last mention, in this position, we said we play bishop e6. What if bishop to c4? Desperate for trades and say, let's see if we can simplify this game and at least go to the end game. Queen a3 check, and now king moves to d2, but then you're infiltrating even more with the other pieces, and when the king goes to the e file, then you got a discover check with this bishop. You move the bishop, you win so much material. King to b1, queen a2 check, king moves. We don't have queen a1 obviously, but you play queen to a4. Now double attack on the bishop, you're pinning that bishop and you're winning material. There's no way to stop. If bishop moves, you're winning this queen, right? So we were going in this position. Earlier we said knight to d5 is not possible because of knight takes in e4, and we mentioned how knight takes b6 doesn't work because of the check. Knight c3 doesn't work because you can just take it. What if knight to e3? That doesn't change that much, because now you play queen to g5 anyway. You're pinning this knight. f3 can never happen, because when you move this knight away, there's going to be double attack on this rook. It's going to be game over. And let's make an example. If white plays h4 in this position to attack the queen, queen to f4, and nothing stops you from playing knight f2, absolutely nothing, you're going to win material. If white plays g3, well, then you can take this with a queen, and then if you get taken, knight takes back, you're winning. If white plays f3, as I said, see knight g3 now makes this fork, pins these two, it's game over. So there's no point in continuing that. Last mention, in this position, we said how nothing works with knight to d5 idea. Okay, what if f3, the most solid move? Now what to do? Black plays the very unexpected bishop to d7 move, giving up a pawn. Although to be fair, the pawn in e4 is still pinned, right? You'll be taking a queen, so that's not, it's kind of a move that I rarely want to play. Okay, what if queen to d2 now? Queen to f2, I'm pinning this pawn, and now threatening to just take here. There's a free pawn. And it looks really nice, also allowing the development of the bishop. Surprisingly, we do take this pawn, and now we have a small advantage. So this is white playing only the top engine moves all the way until now, and we're still winning because white is playing a faulty variation. By the way, when I say faulty variations, that doesn't mean I look at only the bad moves of our opponent. I look at every possible moves. What I do is I keep the most solid moves for the end of the video, because first of all, you need to know how to punish all the possible mistakes and all the moves that look normal. I don't even look at stupid moves. I look at moves that are completely normal, and then they actually don't work. Then I keep the most solid for the end of the video, but you're still winning. So here our opponent will have to recapture the pawn, but it just loses. You see, knight takes, then knight takes, pawn takes, and now rook takes in a2. Okay, king moves to attack the rook. There's absolutely no compensation. Our opponent is threatening nothing. Rook to e4 is the best move. Bishop develops and protects the pawn. Nothing works. You just play queen e7. Much better position for black. Rook to f1. Knight to e5. Position evaluated as -4. Black is up a pawn and is planning to play rook a8. We also threatening to take the knight. We also have an idea of playing bishop e6, swapping with his knight. Should be a very easy endgame. The best move by white if black, but the best move by black if black were to move again now would be c5, with the idea of playing c4. We're gonna drop the line there and make the very last mention of this video, and that's gonna be the end of the how to beat the Scotch game. So d4, take, and now bishop to c5. Let's look at the variation with the early bishop e3, which is the main line. Okay, as we all know, we play queen f6. We've seen this extensively in previous videos. c3 now main move, and queen to g6. After queen to f3, defending the pawn in e4, we talked about all the million ways that our opponent can try to defend the pawn in e4. Queen f3 was only seen once, and I said that the best move to continue is knight g to e7. Now, there's a move here. We went on to play bishop c4 and everything that happened next. You know, now you play knight to e5, queen e2, then you take this knight. You remember from that video. However, what if our opponent plays knight takes in c6? This is the last thing that has to be seen, and the most solid and boring move from our opponent. And also, you know, it can give you some thinking, because here you can't take back with the knight, right? Because then you lose the bishop. And you can't really take this bishop because the knight can come with an attack on this knight, you know, and then there's an attack on the queen. And even if you take this, you're still losing in material. So the only move is queen takes in c6. So our opponent is trading. Okay. Bishop to d3 now, developing. Castle. Castle, and we play d6. So this is the most boring variation. We both have the bishop pair and nobody seems to have any advantage. Okay, knight to d2, developing. Bishop to e6. That's how the pieces will be developed. Bishop e6 is putting pressure on this pawn. Let's look at two options here. What if white plays e5? Just so you don't have to calculate the massive amount of stuff that can happen, straight away take this bishop. This is the best thing to do. And now a swap of queens doesn't work because knight takes back, and then our opponent will have to take our piece back. But now you take this pawn. Up a pawn, fantastic knight against our opponent's isolated pawn. So that's really stupid. So in this position, after we just taken the bishop in e3, queen takes back, saving the integrity of the pawn structure. Okay, pawn takes in e5, queen takes back, and now queen to d7. And we have a skewer. So there's not much to do. What should our opponent do? A move like, okay, bishop to c4, you just win the knight. There's nothing here. You might think, okay, you take here, but then they take here, pawn takes back, queen takes with the fork, but doesn't win the knight simply because rook f7. And then you're going to involve the rest of your pieces. So in this position, what if queen to g3 to protect the bishop? But still, you just play rook a to d8. That's it. Double attack on this bishop. The bishop can't move away, and then we will take the knight. Okay, what if in this position, okay, the best engine move will be queen to d4. This is the best that the engine finds to survive, but then you take, pawn takes back, isolated pawn, and we're gonna win because of that. Let's make an example. Rook f to d8 is the best move. Knight to f3 defends the pawn. f6 stops the knight from going to annoying squares. Rook a to d1, you just take this pawn. This is not a poison pawn. It's a free pawn for no reason. What if white plays rook f to d1? Okay, rook d7, piling up the attack on this pawn. Bishop to e2 allows the knight not to get pinned by the bishop, allows the rook to defend this pawn. The knight keeps defending it as well. But no, that pawn is on borrowed time. Rook a to d8. Okay, a3 stops the bishop from winning this pawn and prepares the rook from winning to c1, attacking c7. Okay, king to f8 is the best move, so that this knight is no longer a loose piece. Rook a to c8, c6. That's it. h3, and now the best move is bishop to d5. The idea is to play knight f5 and then go for this pawn. You can also take this knight first and then win this pawn and capitalize on that weakness. Knight to e1. The idea of going maybe knight to c2, at least avoiding this swap. Bishop to b3 attacks the rook. The rook will have to move. If rook to d2, then simply knight f5. That's it. You're winning this pawn. Game over. What if our opponent plays rook to d3 with a counter attack on this bishop? Bishop to e6 again. Rook d back to d1, but knight f5 now comes. Knight c2 is never possible because bishop b3 pins it, and then you will be winning material. What if white plays g4 now and say to this knight, you know what? Get out of here. I don't want to deal with you. Knight to h4. And now rook to c3, maybe the idea of being able to play knight to f3 and start trading with these tremendous pieces and see if white can hold the position. Knight to g6. When we go to f4 would be very well placed. So after knight to d3, stopping that from happening and maybe threatening to play knight c5, attacking this rook and this pawn. Rook to e7, attacking the bishop. Now king to f1 isn't really a good move because we can still play maybe bishop g2 check, king takes, and you can go in the second rank. Let's say bishop to f1 now. Okay, knight to h4 again. And bishop can't go to g2 because we have two attackers. Okay, so let's make an example. If our opponent plays this move, knight to c5 now, you simply kick it out with b6. The knight will have to go back to d3, for instance. There's nowhere else that will be useful. And now knight f3 is the move, the last one we're going to play before closing this video, because we've gone way too far. It's been a very long video. And now the white player will go into a discover check. So that indicates that nothing was winning. Nothing was able to save our opponent in the end. The very last mention in this position, we just played bishop e6. And earlier we went through e5 and everything that happens next. What if our opponent doesn't play e5 but rather plays queen to g3? These bishops are well placed, you know, bishop h6 idea, maybe e5 without the swaps. The bishop is, you know, they're all very well placed. The knight can potentially go to e4. It looks really nice, but you just take this one and that's it. Queen takes back, rook f to e8. And after the knight goes to f3, queen to b6 is the best move. So we do want to trade. If we do take, then this pawn, that would be an isolated pawn, but we're also attacking d2 here. Let's see the most active variation for our opponent. If they take, we take back with the pawn to give a better endgame for black, although this is the absolutely most solid variation for white. Knight to d4. Let's look at this move. Knight to c6. Put pressure on that knight. Okay, let's look at this move. Knight takes e6. This doesn't work, obviously, because the best move is queen takes. And now there is no Zwischenzug for white. They have to take back, but after you take back, this is a double isolated pawn. It's a massive weakness to continue the game. The white player can't afford to do that. And in this position, obviously, what if instead white plays rook f to e1? Okay, well, take the knight. Pawn takes back. It looks really good. You can't really take this pawn because then the rook comes in the second rank, in the 7th rank. And as we all know, rook in the 7th rank, money in the bank. Black plays c5. And now if they take, you can take back. You got a majority on the queen side. And you can start pushing for glory. d5 can't happen because of bishop takes in d5. Besides, now we have a passed pawn on c5, and when we remove the queen, we also have the possibility to play c4, queen c7, and b5, and carry on.